Thank you. Thank you. No, just thank you very much. I wasn't going to say Bruce. I was just going to say very much. You'll notice that I have a speech defect. It being a free country, you can either get adjusted to it or run screaming from the room. I won't break down crying. I've always I'm stuttered. As I get older, I stutter less, which is sometimes bad news for people, because it means I talk more. Now, I want to try to persuade you to change the way you talk about politics, and maybe the way that you think about it. And the main sort of takeaway I want to persuade you of is to change the way you use the word liberal. In the United States now, well, some of you are not from the United States, but in the United States, and to some degree in Britain, liberal in Canada, liberal doesn't mean what it once meant, which is an economic and social and political policy for a free people, where everyone's free, where poor people are free, where black people are free, where women are free, gay people, all religions are free. That's the basic definition of a liberal, is someone who believes in this free society and doesn't think that the state, the government, is their mother, or worse, their father. Doesn't believe that we should turn to the government to solve most of our problems. We should be free and independent people. Now, it does not mean what you might call screw you libertarianism of Ayn Rand's sort. She did a lot of damage. Ayn Rand was she was a Hollywood scriptwriter, which makes me wonder why she wrote such terrible novels. She was originally from Russia. She suffered the Russian Revolution and moved to the United States. Became an extremely influential figure, and wrote these novels that you have to be 18 to read. I tried to read one some years ago, and I couldn't get past page 15. Because her view of a economic and social and political policy of liberty was, too bad if you're not rich, I am, shut up. You could call it more accurately the Donald Trump theory of society. Screw you, I'm rich, you're not, shut up. And that's not my version of what is usually called in the United States since the 1950s libertarianism. But I want you to stop calling, I put it the other way, I want you to start calling, in fact, I'm going to call myself from now on a liberal. I'm writing a book, or I've finished the book, and it's under submission to the Yale University Press. It'll be available in about a year and a half, called How to Be a Humane Libertarian. Essays in a New Liberalism. So it's not Ayn Rand. It's not even my beloved former colleague, a real mensch, a wonderful man, Milton Friedman. Because what Milton did is more or less the same thing that Ayn Rand did, which was to take ethics out of the considerations of a free society. Not to allow ethical questions into the discussion. And from the point of view of the history of liberalism since the 18th century, that's very strange. It has to do with a movement of scientism in economics, positive economics it was called. And I hope I can say it was called. I hope we can get over it in economics. And it said that, well, we're scientists, real scientists. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. And we're gonna have this science, capital S, and it's gonna tell you the facts of the matter, and we're not gonna make any ethical judgments about what we do, or what the economy should be like, or how we should treat the poor, or anything. I'm gonna refuse, as Milton did. He kind of did, but of course he didn't really. But he said, I'm not a preacher. They always use that word, preacher. I'm just going to tell you the facts, ma'am. And it's a silly position. It's immature. It's non-philosophical. You may find it amusing that in economics, the word philosophical is a swear word. The economists will say to each other, if they don't like the argument you're making, that's rather philosophical, isn't it? You know, you're supposed to be embarrassed that you've uttered a philosophical word. And this is crazy. We're human beings. We depend on judgment and ethics to run our lives, and our lives include the economy. So there's been how can I say, a misdirection in thinking about the economy. According to my socialist friends, and I have a great many, I was once a socialist myself, sort of a not very scholarly Marxist when I was a kid. Is that a dog? No, it's not a dog, sorry. I just saw this little face peeking out. I thought it was a dog. I love dogs, so I'm not criticizing. The standard take in American politics is that the left is ethical and the right is not. And this is why we have such a hard time talking to each other, because the left won't listen. Why should you listen to Hitler? Don't give Hitler, I agree, don't give Hitler the time of day. And there's this ethical belief that the left has, that anyone who's not left-wing hates the poor and is apparently under the is salaried by the Charles Koch Foundation, and that must be bad. Now, I don't think this is correct, even of conservatives, and I'm not a conservative, as Bruce mentioned. I'm not a conservative, I'm a liberal. And here's how to think of it, I think. I have an essay, by the way, that's on the Institute webpage. Is that correct, Bruce? That goes on and on about this if you want more. Here's how to think of it. The left-right axis is an argument about power. It's an argument about how to use state power. On the left, my friends, my many socialist friends, want to use it to extract money from rich people, say, and hand it out to other people. And they want to have an expansive government of some sort, and not just of some sort, of a very particular sort, a redistributive government. And they want to use force to do it. Now, this you may, if you're of the left, you may say, oh no, we don't want to use force. But if you're involved with the state, the government, you're involved with using force. The classic definition of a government was by Max Weber, the great German sociologist and economic historian, in 1919. The state is a monopoly of legitimate violence in a certain territory. A monopoly of legitimate violence in a certain territory. Now, of course, I'm not against governments or against monopolies of legitimate violence. I don't want oligopolies of violence. I don't want the mafia fighting the government and some third party coming in, the fascists or something, to beat up on people. I don't want anyone to use violence. And that's the key to liberalism. Liberalism, in the correct classic definition, so distorted in American politics, is the theory that human beings can get along by leaving each other alone, mostly. Not by disdaining each other, not talking to your Muslim friends or something, but by strictly leaving people alone, not pushing them around. Whereas the theory on the left, and I'm going to mention the right in a second, is about pushing people around. It's about the exercise of this violence. So the standard left-right spectrum that people talk about all the time is between the left that wants to use violence and a right that wants to use violence. These are the conservatives who I don't associate. Well, I associate with them. I had an argument the other day with a professor at the business school of the University of Chicago. I won't name him. And he started in on this conservative line that we shouldn't admit Muslims into the country. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, because they're terrorists. This guy was supposed to be a free market liberal. And he had absorbed this conservative nonsense from Fox News that all Muslims are terrorists, which I said, are you nuts? This is insane. It's a great world religion. The very word means peace. What are you talking about? In fact, I pointed out to him that European and American terrorism was much higher with entirely domestic sources in the 60s and 70s. Vastly higher. In Britain, the IRA. In Italy, the Brigati Rossi. In Germany, the Baader-Meinhof gang, which, by the way, is a nice point, because the Baader-Meinhof gang would seize prominent business people and hold them for ransom and often murder them. And since these guys often drove BMWs, the Germans started calling this is German humor, it's quite surprising, called them Baader-Meinhof-Wagen. Anyway, the actual rates, now this is not true in the Middle East, that terrorism has gone up tremendously, but not in Europe. This reaction to Muslim migration there is just insane. Oh, they're going to be terrorists. So I'm not a conservative. I don't go along with that. In fact, as I said, there's this violent spectrum from left to right. And then there are the liberals, the real ones, moi. And they're up somewhere, they're on another axis. You may say they're on another planet, but they're not. They believe in free exchange, free speech, the whole of the First Amendment. They believe in letting people alone and not obstructing them, not using the government to put hooks and chairs in their way, which is what both the conservatives And the left, let's start calling them progressives, because that's what they want to be called now, are interested in doing. And now, as I said, I'm not against all government. I think that would be kind of crazy, but because you do need government against bad people, against robbers and against force and fraud. Because if we had no government, we'd have the war of all against all, and the life of man would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So I understand the case for government. But you don't need to go to the Hobbesian extreme, the Hobbesian extreme of a government of the size we have these days. In 1910, the expenditures of all levels of government added all together in the United States was 7.5%. So it's state, local, and federal. 7.5%. Now it's 35%. What is this? What do we get for 35%? Do we need to get things from the government? Agricultural subsidies, corporate welfare, large military expenditures, masses of bureaucrats at the state and local level hassling people about getting licenses to braid hair. Is that what we need? In the United States, there are 1,000 occupations that require a government license. 1,000. Hair braiding is the most egregious example I've heard of, but I'm sure there are worse cases. In order to braid hair, you need to go to, hair braiding school for a year or two, and then you'll get, if you pass the hair braiding exam, it's like the final exam in a course, then you get to braid hair. Now this is a great oppression, especially on the African American community, because they're the ones who do a lot of hair braiding. So it's a completely crazy law. And the government likes to have something to do, so it keeps intervening. In the state of Tennessee, if you want to open a new moving company, a furniture moving company, a couple of guys in a truck, you have to ask the existing truck companies if you should be allowed to enter. Now, what do you think they say? Well, that's pretty obvious. And on and on and on. The government, this big government that we have, is not a good thing for poor people. In fact, it's especially bad for the very poor, in my opinion. In the 19th century, the south and west sides of Chicago, where I live, were hives of industrial activity. Now, these were very poor people. They had just come over from Poland or Czechoslovakia or Italy, and they worked in hard conditions. That was because the economy was not very, very productive at the time, but they had a job. Now, the south, and especially the west side of Chicago, is an economic desert. There are no jobs for the kids standing on street corners, tempted to join gangs. There are no jobs because the local government has prevented the jobs from going there. In order to get a business license in Chicago, you have to go through a lot of folderol. You have to be in the right zone. You think the city is zoned for business or not. I have a friend in my church who has a sideline of fixing sewing machines. Now, it's not a big deal. It's just she fixes sewing machines. She knows how they work. She can't do it because she can't do it in her home. Why is that? Because there's terrible pollution from fixing sewing machines that fixing sewing machines is likely to cause them to explode and kill everyone in the neighborhood? No, it's because the city has zoned her building for residential use only. You can't do a business out of your own home. So the government's not your friend. That's the key understanding that you need to develop to escape from this conservative left-wing spectrum and see the merit of a free society, of a society of free individuals who can do what they want, subject to not hurting other people. Do what they want without force or fraud, and leave them alone. Now, why is this such a good thing? Well, here's one reason it's a good, there are actually two reasons. One is that you want to have free people. Now, not everyone wants to be free. Some people want to be taken care of by Uncle Sam or by, I don't know, Brother Chicago or completely incompetent Aunt Illinois. And I can understand that. We were very comfortable when we were children. It was nice. I remember being a child. I thought it was kind of cool. Nice. Of course, I couldn't buy as much candy as I wanted to, but still, I was comfortable. I had a happy family. So we kind of assume that happy familyhood is the way to go in making a society. This is one of the central metaphorical traps of modern politics. In the 1920s, a Swedish politician in the parliament gave a famous speech that spoke of Sweden, him wanting Sweden to be a national home. A national home. Because we've all been children in most of us, in loving families, and we just want the society to be a loving family. Now, it didn't work out too well for Sweden, but it wasn't completely insane. But it went much too far, and the Swedes drew back in the 1990s. So I'm trying to persuade you to accept this old new vocabulary of liberals. The progressives, the left, they can have the word progressive. The right in the United States has made liberal a bad word. On Fox News, it's a bad word. You're a liberal. I hate you. You're stupid. That's kind of the line. So they've called themselves progressives. Let them have the word. If they don't mind being associated with compulsory sterilization. In the United States, North Carolina being a famous case, Sweden and Norway having the highest percentage of the population compulsorily sterilized into the 1970s. If they don't mind that version of progressivism, which was racist and nativist, and again, sort of Donald Trump in the old days, then they can have the word. And conservatives can go on calling themselves conservatives, that's fine, they can have that word. But I want you to use or start thinking about what kind of society you actually want to be in. Do you want liberty? I always stutter on the word liberty, which is quite irritating for someone who likes it a lot. And if you do, consider becoming a liberal. And it doesn't mean being cruel and nasty to the poor. In fact, as they say in France, au contraire. A true liberal, John Stuart Mill Adam Smith. I always cross myself when I mention Adam Smith. They were very generous towards the poor and wanted to help the poor. But they wanted to actually help the poor. They didn't want a virtue signal, which is one of the big problems with the left and the right. They're both virtue signaling instead of adopting policies that would actually help the poor. Look, if we eliminated all licensure laws in the United States tomorrow, the society would go on, nurses, doctors, plumbers, etc., etc. If we dropped all of them, society would go on, firms would spring up that specialized in certifying privately certain kinds of nurses, say, and it wouldn't collapse. We don't need this revival of medieval mercantilism, which we're essentially going towards. Now there's a history to this. I'll talk a tiny bit more and then we can chat about this. There's a history to this. Let me get my glasses out so I can remember the history. Well, I don't need my glasses. Look, in the 17th century struggle in England over the power of the king versus parliament, some people, Whigs they were called, started to talk in this liberal way. Old Whigs was the terminology that eventually was adopted in the 18th century. In the 18th century, talk about liberalism got more explicit and more theorized. Adam Smith is the great example. In 1776, he wrote, "We need the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice." The liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice. You think, well, that sounds kind of socialist to me. No, it's not. By equality, he meant equality of opportunity. That is, the government not putting hooks and chairs in your way. And an 18th century Scotsman, as he was very familiar with the government putting hooks and chairs in your way. Tariffs, regulations, favoritism to this group or that. His country had been conquered by the English, although he didn't mind it. He was a lowlander, and he knew about he knew what the state was, as everyone did before the 20th century. No one before the 20th century viewed the government as the sensible place for a national home. No one did. They were all like modern Italians. They all knew that the government was corrupt. In a famous phrase by a liberal, in a way, also an extreme Murray Rothbard, the government is a band of robbers into whose clutches we have fallen. The government is a band of robbers into whose clutches we have fallen. And no one before the 20th century doubted that. Lords and aristocrats, kings, queens, were extractive. Everyone knew that. And their friends, the high merchants, knew that too. They were extracting from their fellow citizens by imposing tariffs and quotas and so forth. And then it changed in a way that I find very peculiar. But let me get the history lined up correctly. Then in the 19th century, liberalism of the sort I'm advocating became all the rage, all the fashion. There were conservatives, reactionaries, who wanted to stop it, but no one doubted that a free society without excessive regulation, without government ownership of the means of production, was the best way to go. until around 1848, an important year in European history. And it's hard to explain. I don't have any snappy explanation of it. But after that, liberalism started to fall out of favor, and state action came into favor. The new liberals, so-called in Britain in the late 19th century, were slow socialists, as were the American progressives. The first Roosevelt and Wilson were this kind of progressive. And they wanted the government to have a more active role. Speak softly, but carry a big stick, or don't speak so softly in any way, use the stick. So, in economics, in technical economics, there's a parallel development, which I want to tell you about. From 1848 on, economists make their reputation, most of them do, if they have a reputation, by showing that capitalism doesn't work over and over and over again. They started talking about imperfections. In the 1890s, the big one was thought to be monopoly and the trusts. In the 1920s, externalities. In the 1930s, alleged tendency of capitalism to mass unemployment. In the recently, informational asymmetries. I've counted these. Now, I haven't got a comprehensive list, but it's in a paper of mine at my website. And I found over 100 alleged imperfections in capitalism. 100. And it's how we teach microeconomics. First week or so, we tell them about the supply and demand cross. And then we spend the rest of the term telling them all about the imperfections. Imperfections in the labor market, monopsony and monopoly, and again, externalities, spillovers, all kinds of terrible things. Now, from 1848 on, this terrible system filled with imperfections that students learn about how terrible it is. It gets worse and worse. The more you study economics, the more convinced you become with my friendly enemy, Joe Stiglitz, for example, that if there's any externality, the government should move in, because this capitalist stuff can't solve it. It's ridiculous. It's hopeless. Meanwhile, income per head under capitalism, when it's been used, has increased, hear this, by 3,000%. Not 300%, not a factor of 4, but a factor of 30. 3,000%. Correctly measured to allow for improvements in quality, much higher. We're much better at medicine than we were. Glass is much better than once was. Carpeting, look at this marvelous carpeting here, is cheaper. Oh no, not cheap, inexpensive, and so forth. Inexpensive steel, which makes containerization possible, which has radically cut the cost of international shipping, et cetera, et cetera. So, what's going on here? The students are being told that, oh my God, there are these imperfections and we can't rely on the market to do a damn thing. And yet, it did a damn thing. It raised the income of ordinary people by a factor of 30. What is the problem here? As my friend John Mueller at Ohio State says in his book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Ralph's Pretty Good Grocery, you have to be an American of a certain sort to know what he's talking about. He says American capitalism and democracy are pretty good And in this vale of tears, that's probably what we can hope for. We can't hope for perfection. We go across to the perfection store and we end up with communism or fascism. So it's highly dangerous to think in these utopian terms that so many of our friends do. So that's my message. Let me just make sure I've made every single point in all three of my books. Make sure you've got it. Yeah. So we're in a slow socialist age. The pressure really from both the left and the right, as the Republicans showed in their shocking reversal about government deficits in December. We're on our way, not to serfdom, I guess, but as Hayek said, but to an increasing takeover of our lives by the government. Milton Friedman quoted the great Oklahoma humorist, forgetting his name, the cowboy. What? Yeah, Will Rogers, who would say in the 1920s, "Just be glad you don't get the government you pay for." Think about that. And that's right. Just be glad you don't get the government you pay for. Because when you're paying for more of it, it's completely taking over your life. It's preventing you from doing things. It's guiding you. It's nudging you. I just wrote a piece for Reason magazine about Richard Thaler's Nobel Prize last October. And shall we say, I dissed Thaler. Have a look at it. And he's one of these imperfections guys. He combines the imperfect. Look, there are over 200 psychological biases that the psychologists have proven. At least they think they have. 200. There's bias of this sort and that sort. It's a miracle we can cross the street. We should be bumping into walls all the time, falling down. How do we get anything done if we're so biased and we are irrational in this deep sense? He combines that with this long history in economics of talking about imperfections in the market, none of which have been adequately measured to show that they're really big enough to affect the economy. Frank may have some objections to that in health economics, and maybe he's right. But on most of them, the economy has performed so well, driving through all these imperfections, to use Yiddish syntax, we should have such imperfections. This is good. This is good. Let's have more of those imperfections if they result in 3,000% increases in income per head. So that's my tale. I want you to start using the word correctly. But more important, of course, I want you to think about it. I want you not to, there's an awful lot of politics, and I know this. I was on the left for a long time, and then was a Chicago economist, and then now I'm kind of, pardon me, an Austrian economist, and a big follower of Hayek, and then I do humanomics, which goes way beyond Hayek, I think. I understand that we decide on our politics when we're about 20, sometimes younger. And it's very dangerous because we tend to choose our politics and then never rethink it. It's like deciding who your favorite baseball team is. And then, I switched from, I had a lot of history. I switched from the Red Sox, who just depressed the hell out of me, to the White Sox because I was on the South Side, to now, I know it's a betrayal, to the Cubs, whom I now love. And it's this football, baseball, sports team attitude. I'm never going to change my views on socialism. I love socialism. It's got such a nice sound. I'm just going to stick with it. You shut up, you fascist pig. That's not how to really think about things. You have to open your mind. You have to not categorize people immediately as fools because they're associated with Milton Friedman or something, and start to listen to the actual factual arguments and the logical arguments. And I urge you not to leap to political conclusions. Most of you are students at your age. Stop, consider, wait, look for other points of view, talk to people, and gradually settle on a politics. And then, look, there's a great phrase from the Middle Ages in Europe, which was over a lot of the town halls. It said, audite et alterum partem. Listen even to the other side. That's what it means in Latin. Audite et alterum partem. Listen even to the other side, and I urge you to. I urge you to do that. So I implore you to stop thinking of capitalism as crass materialism with these greedy bastards who are actually pursuing your welfare because they only make money if you like their stuff. Otherwise, they don't make any money. If you make a very bad hotel that everyone hates, it's going to fail. So what you want to do in your hotel is make everyone like your hotel, which means they come voluntarily to rent a room in your hotel. You're better off, they're better off, national income goes up. What more to say? Well, I got 3 volumes here, one of which you can buy. I've also got my account of my transition, the 3 years, going from Donald to Deirdre, which was, my mom was very wise. She's 95. She says, don't do anything more interesting. You can kind of see her point. Don't decide to become a tree or fly to the moon or something. You're a boring professor, stick with that. And gender change is all you're allowed to have. And